Greetings and welcome to Cooking Up Advice with Dr. June, where we normally cook up a dish, but we always dish out advice. Today we have with us Moni Boyce, who is going to share some very interesting things that has happened in her life. Filmmaker, author, world traveler, join us so we can dish.
It's gonna be all right.
Welcome, Moni Boyce.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So there are so many things that you have done and things that you are still doing right now that are very exciting. Let's talk about how you started with filmmaking. Now you're an author. And then in between that, I guess you were a world traveler. So share with us.
Okay, so yeah, I started out as a filmmaker. I went to University of Southern California for film. Myself and another filmmaker I'd gone to college with were both kind of commiserating. We were both going to have to go away and work on films for our bosses, and neither one of us wanted to do that. So we both quit our jobs and actually made our first short film together. And that short film got into a lot of different festivals, and then HBO licensed it from us. From there, I was just like, well, I'm gonna just get out there and start producing. So, I started producing other people's short films. And then in 2008, I got together with my sister. I'm a twin. We both went to college for film, and then she'd gone to law school, but got together with her and then another filmmaker, and we started a post-production company.
Wow. Because that's what I was going to ask you. You did your first one with your friend, and then you started doing other people's, but you got back to doing yours again?
Well, as a producer, you're never really quite working on your own film. It's always, there's always like a script that belongs to, or a director that want to work with type of thing. So you usually try to find material together. They might already have a script, and, I've fallen in love with it. And now I'm like, oh, I want to, be part of this project. Always used to get asked, what does a producer do? And I'm like, what is it that you don't do? Like you're usually in charge of handling the budget, trying to bring the money to the table, making sure that the film gets in the can. Like I help hire crew, help with the casting, my input is kind of like all over like the film, and just trying to make sure that the director's vision gets realized. Filmmaking is one of those jobs that you have, the running joke is that everybody in Hollywood's crazy type of thing. And to some degree, you have to be a little like, I wouldn't say necessarily crazy, but a risk taker. I mean, because, especially when you're starting out and it's like the money is not easy to come by. There's always that chicken and egg syndrome, because it's like in order to get the money, they want you to have somebody attached or, different things. Or then to get the actor, you've got to have some money. So it was always like this, how do we go about making this work?
Well, my question is with the independent film, like I know there's a lot of producers. When I see other movies, are there a lot of producers with independent films also?
Usually you try to avoid that as much as possible, but yes, because essentially what happens as a producer, especially if you're the one who's kind of there in the trenches doing everything, in order sometimes to get the money coming in, you have to sometimes give away a producer credit to somebody who's bought money in, but they won't like actually work on the set.
Oh, I see. I get it.
So for instance, like say on a studio film, all the people that you see have producer credits are usually like the big corporations that put the money in, usually people that work at the studio level at an executive level. And then there might be an actor who that was part of their deal, that they get a producer credit. Maybe they actually did have a hand in the producing. You just don't know. Because I always get asked like, oh, they're in the show and they're producing the TV show. Like, if for instance, Angela Bassett on 911 gets a producer credit.
Right. So then, but you never like to be in the film. You always like the producer.
No, it was funny because in college, I actually acted in quite a few of my friends' like films that we would make. But for me, I always liked being behind. I liked seeing the film come together from that end of like knowing we went from like script to like the, walking the red carpet, so to speak, of like, we
Right.
finished and now we're showing the film to everybody. It's always like, I'm that person that sits through the credits because I know like all the blood, sweat, tears, pain, and suffering that
Yes.
goes into like actually because you're, depending on how the size of the film, you're working with anywhere from like, like maybe 40, 50 people up to like, like 1,000 or so people to make this thing.
Wow.
I mean, especially, I say 1,000, not that 1,000 people are on set every day, but the thing is,
Right.
when you're working on something, say like Avengers, there's all these people on the back end of that, like all the people that have to do all the effects and the
Yeah.
whatever. So there's a lot of people that go into
And the
making that
extras,
happen.
because I used to be extra in movies, and then you
Yeah.
have all these people that are running down the street. I remember doing.
Exactly. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and then you're dealing with a lot of different personalities. And
Mhm.
so to get something in the can and be like, we did it, is such an incredible feeling when you have all of this that you're kind of working against. You know what
Yes.
I'm saying? To make
To
it
pull it
happen.
together. So then what made you start traveling?
I've always been a traveler. Like, I grew up a military kid. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved a lot growing up. Like, I lived in Germany. I was born in California. We lived in Texas, Germany, Virginia's where I finished out and, did high school. And then I was off to LA to go to USC. But I always loved traveling. And so I would usually do it like when you're working like on a film or an event, you're usually like working for like anywhere from like 3 months, maybe 6 months or something like that at a time. So usually in between working, me and my sister would be like, let's go someplace. Like in 2012, we took a month off and we went to Ireland, Scotland, and then did London for the Olympics.
Wow.
2015, I heard about an opportunity to go travel full time. And so I was debating, because obviously I was like, well, if I take a year off, that means I'm taking a year off, obviously, from my career to go do this. And I was so, for lack of a better phrase, I was burned out. I didn't know at the time that I was burned out, but I was burned out. Because the thing is, you're working 16, 18-hour days. And as a producer, like, so usually when you're working a film, it can be a 5 or 6 day work week.
Mhm.
Often we're working a 6-day work week, but as a producer, that doesn't mean that day off I actually get off. I'm usually trying to see like, okay, what needs to be done, like when we get ready to come back the next day, like what fires do I have to put out? We might be watching dailies of like what we've shot, different things like
Wow.
that. So you're always still on the clock. As a producer, you are like everything to everyone, like therapist,
Wow.
mother, like, because the thing is, I'd gone through a divorce. Like, I'm trying to think of how many years before that I'd gone through a divorce that I hadn't quite dealt with, in terms of like from an emotional and mental standpoint for
Right.
myself. I like had to close my business because just the nature of the industry changed. So the post-production company that we started in 2008, we ended in 2013. And that was because essentially things that were machine based that cost more money for a company to deal with, and people would come in and hire you, it then became software based, which meant that anybody
Oh,
could then essentially do the job
you didn't
for
need
way less.
you didn't need the manpower anymore.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, because we had, we were a brick and mortar company with leases on equipment and things like that. And now the same guy that I was paying to come in and work the machines could then be like, I've got the software, I can run this out of my house. So then that's when I went back into like independent producing and that kind of thing after we closed the business.
Mm.
But like I said, when 2015 came along and somebody was like, oh, there's this opportunity to go travel full time, I was like, oh my God, that would be like a dream.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so I was just, everybody was like, but you're going to walk away from like a career that you've been building for like the last, like 16 years. And I was just like, yep, it'll be here when I come back. It's like, if
Wow.
for me, it was just kind of like, this does not have to, my career doesn't define my life, or I wasn't going to let it define my life anymore. Like we started off in Prague, and I remember going to this ice cream shop, and the guy's like, do you want a cup or a cone? And I remember just standing there. I'm sure the people behind me were like, chick, this is not like rocket science. Just tell me what you want. But it was such a moment for me, because I couldn't have told you last time I had an ice cream on a cone, because usually if I'd gotten that, I would have known that somebody's going to call. I won't be able to finish. I'll have to run into a meeting where, again, I won't be able to finish. So I always would get it in a cup, but then it would turn to soup.
Oh no.
So I literally got a cone and I went into the park and just like sat for like hours, just like people watching and eating my ice cream. And it was just this profound sense of like, nobody's looking for me. Nobody's going to call me. Nobody's going to, and I hadn't had that in such a long time where I could just only think about myself.
Nice.
Um, and so it was a much needed trip to just kind of like practice better self-care for myself. Really think about what I wanted at that point in time out of life.
Didn't you decide you wanted to be a writer?
Yes. So I actually, funny enough, I'd actually written a book before I actually left to go travel. I used to, I started, funny enough, it was a couple of years after my divorce, and some friends that knew I used to write like poetry and that kind of thing. They were like, you should get back into writing. So it started with poetry, and then it became scandal fan fiction because I was a huge fan of the show. And then from there, I found this site where women of color were putting up original stories and getting like feedback. And I started, I was just a reader, and then eventually like I had an idea. And so I started writing on there. Like I would come home from like a long day, like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would write and then put it up. And that, so I did that over the course of a year, and then realized that I'd finished a book. And at the time I had no idea of like self-publishing or like, oh, let's turn this into a book. I was just, it was cathartic for me. I wrote
That
it.
I was literally going to ask you, was it cathartic for you? And then you said
Yes,
that.
because there are themes running through it that talk about like forgiveness and that kind of thing. And at the time I dealt with a lot of like, not to say this sounds like a soap opera, but like betrayal and just like trust issues with a lot of people. So for me, it was like dealing with my own forgiveness of like different people that I had, had situations with or whatever. So it was very cathartic for me. So like I said, I put it away, and then it was while I was traveling that, I had money to get me through like the first 6 months of the trip or whatever. And after that, I was like, I'm going to need a job. And somebody was like, oh, there's usually like people that need ghostwriters for blogging and that sort of thing. So I got into that first. And then I got approached about like writing a book. And I was like, well, technically I did just write one. So I was like, yeah, I can do it. I'm that person that's like, I'm going to fake it till I make it. So I'm going to tell you like, I got you. I'm going to figure out how to do it. You know what I'm saying? And then, so I took on ghostwriting this book. And then that's when I was like, wait a second, I have a book that I could put out under my own name. And so I came back to the book or whatever. And while I was overseas, I started, trying to figure out what I would need to do to make that a reality. So once I got back to the US, that's when I started like learning more about publishing and marketing. So by the time I released it in 2019, it was like I had a lot of support from other authors that helped share about my book and that kind of thing.
So how many have you written so far?
So now I'm at, let's see, I want to say it's 7 novels and then 2 novellas and a short story that's in an anthology right now.
Wow.
And so it's about to be 8 full novels at the end of this month. I have a release coming up at the end of this month.
Wow. And see, I think this is a message, it's a message for everybody, but being that it's Black History Month and March is Women's History Month. So, you fit in both of those categories. That listen, ladies of color, go out there and do what it is that you want to do. Give us some positive feedback before we end today.
Definitely. I hear all the time where people are like, oh, I'm too old now or whatever. Listen, I'm 40. I essentially put my first book out when I was 39. Mm-hmm. You're never too old to do something. There's never, and that's the other thing. I always hear people, oh, when it's the right time, when the kids are gone, when this and that. Listen, I'm not telling you don't pay your bills or don't take care of your kids, but at the same time, don't put your life on hold for all these other things. Because the thing is, then you wake up like, at like 50, 60, and you're like, what have I done? This is why people, I feel like, have midlife crises, is because they've put all the stuff that they feel like is too fun or that they can't have right now on hold. Instead of saying, you know what, no, I'm going to incorporate those things into my life. I'm going to go take that trip, or go, do whatever, try a new hobby, do something for yourself. And I think as women, a lot of times we put ourselves on the back burner instead of saying, no, I'm more than just being a mother. I'm more than just being a wife. Like, what were
Right.
those goals and dreams that you had? Don't let those just fall by the wayside. Don't have like resentment or, the shoulda, coulda, woulda is like what I can say. Somebody asked me once, and I was like, I have very few regrets in my life. I could probably count them on one hand and still have fingers left over.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always would rather try something and then fail than to, like, years later still be like, man, what would have happened if I'd only, so I'd rather, because the thing is, I feel like I've learned more from the failures in my life than when something has
Right.
gone right.
Let me tell you something for us more mature women, because see, 39 is like, that's still young. Do you know that, oh my goodness, I cannot think of her name now. The lady who had she's one of the first ones who had a cooking show. And she did not start until she was 56 and got her own, Julia Childs.
Yeah,
She was
yeah, okay, yeah,
56. So it's like, do what you want to do.
yeah.
Don't, and I agree with you. I mean, take care of what you need to take care of, but that doesn't mean that you can't incorporate things that you want to do in your life.
Yeah. And that's
That's
just
great
good. And I will
advice.
say this because some people be like, I don't have the time. Yes, you do have the time. It's called time management. Figure out how much TV you're watching. Because don't get me wrong, I love me some TV. You know what I'm saying? But I use it as kind of like a reward. Like, I got to get my writing done before I'll allow
Hmm.
myself to watch TV. Because the thing is, it's easy, even as something that I do love, it's easy to allow the distractions. And then,
Right.
yes, and then it's easy to say, like, oh, well, I just didn't have time. Yes, you did. You just spent an hour on Instagram or,
Right.
whatever that is. But try to start pulling that time to doing something that might, everybody talks about like the side hustle. But usually the side hustles are things that you enjoy doing. Like, if you're that person that likes making jewelry or you like
Yes.
the little crafty things, get paid for that. I mean, it's like Etsy, put something on Etsy if you make stuff. But
There's an
do it, make some
expression.
money off of it.
The expression says, do what you love and the money will follow. That's what the
Yes.
expression is. And so my advice is, just following up with your advice, is put yourself on a schedule. You can write it down. Like you said, if you know, write down what you do every day. And if you see that you
Yes.
spent an hour on Instagram or whatever, then you know that, okay, spend 15 minutes, 45 of that hour I could have been doing, making my jewelry, writing my book, doing whatever it
Yes.
is, baking.
The thing is, as long as you're making progress, that's what's important.
I love
Every
it.
little step matters.
I love it. Well, guys, you heard it from the professional right here, Moni Boyce. So start doing it, whatever it is that you want to do. I love it. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for
And
having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope that we can get together again after the pandemic, where we are actually in the
Yes,
studio
I would love
together
that.
and
Yes.
doing some things. Okay, everybody, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we will see you next time on Cooking Up Advice with Dr. June.